Good morning, everyone. This is Ben Weisner, your host for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us for Developing Fluency, Vocabulary, and Comprehension with Read Naturally Encore II. This morning, your presenter is Claire Hayes. Claire has been involved with Read Naturally since its development. She consults with educators nationwide to discuss reading, fluency, and the Read Naturally strategy. Claire loves working with teachers to help them maximize the benefits of the various Read Naturally interventions. Claire's presentation will include some time for Q&A today, so please go ahead and ask any questions you may have using the questions tool in your meeting panel. We will also make an effort to get back to as many of you as possible in the coming days with email responses to questions we may not be able to address today. You should have all received the link to the handout for today's meeting. The handout is also available from the meeting panel if you'd like to download and print it out now. Many of you have also asked about a recording of this webinar. We'll be sending out follow-up emails with links to the recording in about 24 hours, so please look for that in your inbox. Feel free to share the recording with anyone at your school or district who you think would benefit from this valuable information. Again, this webinar is Developing Fluency, Vocabulary, and Comprehension with Read Naturally Encore II. We'll be offering other webinars throughout the school year. Check our website at readnaturally.com for more upcoming webinars. Even if you can't make it to our live events, just by registering, you'll be able to receive links to the recordings, and we'll post the recordings on our website as well. Finally, if you're having technical difficulties, please contact GoToWebinar support. Their phone number is listed at the bottom of the meeting panel. And now, without further delay, I'm going to pass the microphone off to Claire Hayes, your presenter for today's Read Naturally webinar.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to all of you who are out there attending this session. I am excited to share information with you about Encore II. I really appreciate you being here. I know how many different directions teachers are pulled, and so it really does say a lot about you that you're here today to learn about Encore II and how you might be able to help your students with it. Encore II is the closest version to the very original Read Naturally program. It's the Blackline Masters with audio support that looks the most similar to what was originally created back in the late 80s and early 90s. So today we're going to talk about what it is, why it's important, the steps that students go through, and how you can, some general information about how you can implement it with your students. So let's go ahead and dig right in. As I know you all know, there's 5 components to teaching reading. Those are listed on your screen now. And Read Naturally Encore focuses primarily on fluency and comprehension and vocabulary support, as well as phonics support in the phonics levels. So within Read Naturally Encore II, we have a few different series, and I'll get into that a little later. One of those series is the Phonics Series. So if you have students working in the Phonics Series, then phonics will be addressed for those students. If you would, for me, picture a student that you have this year who struggles with reading, and just turn on that audio portion in your brain for just a moment and listen to him read. Think of some of the words that you might use to describe that disfluent, struggling reader. Many of them are probably on your screen right now. The very first word that I always think of is pain. It is so very painful to listen to. Imagine how painful it must be to have to read that way. Most of us have a physical reaction to listening to a struggling reader, right? Our stomach gets upset. I start tapping my foot and I think, oh, we got an issue here. We know there's trouble sometimes within as little as 15 or 20 seconds. We know exactly what it sounds like also to be a fluent reader, right? That's the ability to read the way that you speak, with accuracy, with prosody or good expression, and at a rate in which you talk, a conversational rate. We want it to sound nice. That's more enjoyable for the reader and the listener. But most importantly, we want our students to understand what they're reading. That is the end goal for all reading programs, is to get them to a place where they can read with ease and understand what they're reading. And so we think about why we care so much about fluency. It's not just that it's easier to listen to and more fun to read that way. It's that it's incredibly highly correlated with comprehension. So there's many studies that have been done for decades now that show this correlation. What you're looking on your screen is a table that has on the left side the measures, the way we measure comprehension, and on the right side a validity coefficient. So a statistician would tell you that a validity coefficient of 0.6 or higher is what we would consider highly correlated. So all of these measures are highly correlated. They better be, because that's how we measure comprehension in our students. So this particular study took these 4 different measures and compared it to how students performed on standardized comprehension tests. And it found that oral reading fluency was the most highly correlated with how students performed on standardized comprehension tests. This is not the case for every single student, but for the vast majority of our students, this is the case. And I want to demonstrate for you why that is. So what I'm going to ask you to do, even though I can't hear you, what I'd like you to do is to read the words that you see on your screen. I'm going to ask that you read them out loud. When your students work on fluency, whether it be in Encore II or Read Naturally Live or in some other way that you use to work on fluency, they should always do it out loud. Fluency work is always done orally. So what I want you to do by yourself is to read the words you see on your screen, not the whole column. I'm just going to have you read the first line and the second line. Read them as accurately and rapidly as you can, and do so out loud. So please begin reading the first 2 lines out loud. Please begin. Very easy, right? You can kind of breeze right through those. These are probably some of the first words you learned to read. But now what I want you to do is not read the words that you see on your screen, but instead I want you to say the color that the word is written in. And again, I want you to do it out loud. I want you to do it as accurately and rapidly as you can. And I just need you to read those first 2 lines that you did before, okay? But now rather than reading the words, say the color out loud. Begin in the same spot in the upper left-hand corner. Please begin. People always start to trip up around the same spot. Oftentimes there's a little bit of laughter if we were in the same room. And it's kind of amazing at how much harder it is to name the color. Because knowing your colors is a much simpler task. 2, 3, and 4-year-olds can name their colors. In fact, they'd be better at this than you are because they don't know how to read yet. But you are so good with reading that you're having this internal fight. You're telling your brain, stop reading. You can't do it. It's the reason graffiti offends us, because as soon as we see it, we know what it says. We don't have a choice. You read the back of the Cheerios box every morning, you don't care what it says, but when you see words, you know what it says. You're automatic. There was a professor back at the University of Minnesota in the 70s. His name was Dr. Samuels, and he put forth a theory that talked about automaticity. And it deals with the fact that reading is multitasking. You need to know the words, what they say, how they sound. You also need to know the meaning. And so Dr. Samuels' thought was that if our students are going to be good comprehenders, they need to be automatic with the words. Because we know that if we're going to do 2 things at once, one of them needs to be automatic or the other one will suffer, right? Many of us make life-altering decisions while we're in the act of reading. We compare characters in our life, characters in the book, maybe a situation in the book that reminds you of something you experienced yourself. All that while you're doing that, all the while you're reading. And that's what we want for our students. Unfortunately, many of them aren't there. I had a number of people with questions before the seminar began about what do I do about my kids who are so far behind after the last couple years. You're not alone. Every school is dealing with that problem, right? So more than we've ever had in the past, we have students who are below that 50th percentile in oral reading fluency norms, right? And therefore, they're also below the 50th percentile in comprehension and probably vocabulary and all sorts of different issues. So Read Naturally Encore II is used with students who are below the 50th percentile. If you take a look at this larger version of an oral reading fluency norms table, notice what happens to those scores, the words correct per minute scores. As students go from the fall to the winter to the spring, every grade level, every percentile, the numbers get bigger from the fall to the winter to the spring. That was probably even the case when we were on distance learning. Maybe not quite as much as it should have been, but it happened, right? Everybody gets better. And while that is a relief for those of us who work with struggling readers, it is also something we need to remember, because just making progress will never catch up our struggling readers. Their peers are making progress too. So students who are reading in the 3rd grade in the fall of the year, the 75th percentile, are at 104 words. They're struggling reader peers that are just at the 25th percentile. So not even the full range of the table by any means. They're not even there by the end of the year. They're at 91 words by the end of the school year, where their 75th percentile counterparts were significantly above them at the by the start of the school year. Okay, so this is the gap we talk about, right? This is what we are dealing with more so than ever before, probably in our careers, because of how many students ended up falling behind during the last couple of years. So we need a system. We need to figure out a way to get them in the act of reading a lot, so they have a chance of catching up. We know that students become fluent by reading, by practicing, right? That's how you get better and automatic at anything. We also know that setting aside time for independent reading time is not enough, right? What happens during independent reading time for the struggling reader? Some kids might cause a human relations issue in the classroom. That might be the one that you picture when you first think about the struggling reader during independent reading time, is the one who causes issues. But the vast majority of them do not cause issues. In fact, they just pretend to read. They want to fly under your radar. And all of our illiterate adults learn to hide their illiteracy in our classrooms. We can't let that happen to all these students who are struggling after the last couple of years. We got to figure out a way to get them to read. And I know you've done it. I know you've taken time in your evenings. You figure out exactly the right book at exactly the right level. You have candy all over the place and an incentive program on the wall, right? And you get every kid to read during independent reading time. I know you can do it. So let's take that situation. Think of all the effort it takes to get each of those kids in the exact right spot. And let's take 10 minutes of independent reading. A proficient reader in 10 minutes easily reads about 2,000 words when he's reading in his head. Because a proficient reader reading silently reads about 200 words in a minute. So after 10 minutes, that's about 2,000 words. Our struggling readers read significantly fewer words every minute. So she maybe only reads 50 words a minute, meaning that's only 500 words in 10 minutes. So even when these two kids practice the exact same amount of time, there's nowhere near equal practice. This is a disparity of 7,500 words over the course of just one school week. If this is the only time these two kids practice, and we know the difference there, right? We need to figure out a way to get these kids the time that they need to catch up, the practice that they need to catch up. And Encore, Read Naturally Encore, is a system that will allow that to happen for your students. It combines teacher modeling, repeated reading, and progress monitoring. So let me just talk for a moment about each. Teacher modeling is a proficient reader reading in the ear of a non-proficient reader or a struggling reader at a pace that he can read along. Okay. We have a huge range of reading levels in all of our classes. Every teacher does. How do you meet each kid where he is? How do you have a group of mixed levels and find out exactly where they are and get them in that right spot so they can be working at their instructional level? Well, the woman who created this program had that actual assignment when she was getting her master's in the late 80s. And her professor said, I want you to read in the ear of your struggling readers. Read them in instructional level material and have them read with you. Okay, well, she was a special ed teacher. She had many different reading levels in that one group. So she recorded her voice on audio cassettes, slow enough that they could actively read along. And that was where it started. Okay, so now it's a little bit slicker, a little bit smoother. In Encore, it's on an audio CD. In our online program, it's all built into the computer program. But for Encore, students are reading off a Blackline master of a story, and the audio support is delivered through an audio CD. They read each time, they get a little bit faster, so does the audio. They read the words at the same time as the audio, so they learn words they can't read on their own, and they solidify those high frequency words, those words that they have struggled with from 1st through 8th grade, right? So teacher modeling is an essential piece. And the Encore allows you to meet each one of those students. That was another question I had a lot of before the session started. How do I meet all the needs of the range that I have? This program is perfect for that, right? So the next strategy is repeated reading. And that is doing something over and over again. We do it in education all the time. It's mastery learning. That's what we call it usually in education. In athletics, it's just practice, right? Every Olympian will tell you the way they got so good at flipping in the air on ice skates is because they do it over and over and over again, right? So they become masters of it. And in Encore, students read the same passage over and over again until they master the words in that passage to the point in which they can read them in a different passage. Okay, that's the important piece, that it transfers. So you have to bring them to a very high level of automaticity so that that word becomes part of their word bank, so that when they see it elsewhere, they're still able to read it. And the way to get a kid to read something over and over again, especially one who doesn't want to, was another question I had. Students who don't want to read, struggling students don't usually want to read. You wouldn't want to either. But progress monitoring is the hook. They have a timer. Each time they read, they get further on the page. Their number goes up, their graph goes up. It is incredibly rewarding for a kid who struggled for a while, because in as little as 1 minute, he sees he's gotten better and he wants to know he can get better. And that changes the way he views reading. And more importantly, it changes the way he views himself, because after repeated reading and teacher modeling, he can read the way you read, the way his teachers read. And that is so rewarding for him to hear that and to see that progress on a chart. So these 3 strategies together are what make the Encore strategy, the Read Naturally strategy that is employed in Encore 2. Now, the most important thing to think about when you're working with struggling readers is that every minute counts. Some teachers asked, well, I only have a month left in school. Is it worth it? Yes, absolutely. Every minute counts. So you always want to be thinking of, how can I increase the number of words the student is reading? That's what they need. They need practice reading. So always be thinking of ways to maximize the number of words they read in each session. Typically, Encore is used in either a resource room, a reading lab, might be a station at the back of a classroom if you have a para who can come in and work with a small group in the back of the room, a computer lab, maybe before or after school program. Ideally, your student-teacher ratio is 1 to 6. I know that with the number of kids that we're having that struggle with reading, that is a very hard number to achieve. There's ways to make it so that you can manage a slightly larger group, and I'll talk about that when we go through the steps. But ideally, you would figure out a system in which you can get that small group with a para or with you for at least a little bit of time, so that you can give them the attention they need to make the progress. 30 minutes a session, 3 to 5 days a week is ideal. If you have more time, that's better, right? The more time they spend in the act of reading, the more likely they are to make progress. And it's not reading in their head, because we have no idea what they're doing. It's always out loud. We can see what they're doing, right? So with Encore 2, teachers get a hard copy of a Blackline Masters of the 24 stories in the level, okay? And they get hard copies of audio CDs. You can see the student on the left side, she's got a CD player, headphones, her stories are in that folder. She's got graphs behind her story. I had some people asking questions about Read Live versus Encore. Within Read Live, there's multiple programs. So you have Read Naturally Live, Word Warm-Ups Live, 1 Minute Reader Live, and then Read Naturally Live Espanol. Read Naturally Encore 2 is the same as Read Naturally Live. Okay, so students who are using Read Naturally Live don't also use Encore 2. It's kind of a one or the other. The stories are all nonfiction high interest, and they can pick whichever one they want. They're not in any order. We recommend you put them into 2 groups of 12, do all the odd stories, give a student a packet of 12 stories, the odd ones. So story 1, 3, 5, 7, right? And then once he's done with those 12 stories, you can decide, should he get the next set of 12 or do I move his level or goal? Okay. So odd and then even, but they can pick whichever one is in that packet. They have keywords and definitions if they're working in the sequence series. If they're working in the phonics series, it's actually a mini phonics lesson. So we have levels, and I'll explain that in a few moments. Students have a place for a prediction. As you can see, my mouse is circling now. They can write a quick prediction about what the story is going to be about. And then you can see they have this numbered passage. So they can easily calculate their scores on their cold scores, their practices, and their hot timings. There's also a graph. Students color in blue for their very first cold timing, words correct per minute, and red is the final pass timing they read for the teacher. They also have a place to fill in how they do on comprehension questions. The comprehension questions are ordered in a way to help you diagnose a problem. If a student is missing the first question, number 1, frequently, you will see that is the case with this student. Main idea question, number 1, is at the bottom of this graph, and she's missed more than half of them. So at a quick glance, I can see, okay, this student has an issue with comprehension of main idea. I'm going to work on that. Okay, so that's another way to help zoom in on exactly what kinds of comprehension issue each individual student has. There is a place for a written retell in the sequence series. In the phonics series, it's a word list and a spelling activity. Okay. And if you think your student is so far behind, you don't have time to work on writing yet, they don't have to do that. All right. So depending on the individual needs and goals of each student, you might tell them to skip the retell, or maybe they say it to you out loud. Audio for Read Naturally Encore II comes in an audio CD. There's 2 stories on each CD, and you get a big album with 12 CDs in it. So 2 stories on 12 CDs, of course, is 24 nonfiction stories. When you're preparing for your students, you're going to need to collect your materials. As you can see on the left, she's working diligently, but it didn't come that way, right? The teacher does have to do some work to get it in a folder, get the student the material she needs. So each level comes with a black line master of the stories with their quiz questions as well as graphs so they can keep track of their progress. Each level also comes with a glossary. Glossaries are ideal for working on vocabulary. Some of our kids struggle with comprehension because of a vocabulary issue. Each story in Read Naturally Encore has many words that are bolded. Having students look up those keywords in the glossary before they do their read along is a great way to work on vocabulary. Okay, sometimes we have students who are even a little more fluent than they are comprehenders due to vocabulary. And if that's the case for your student, having them look up those keywords in the glossary is incredibly powerful. 1, it reminds them how much we care about meaning. And 2, research shows that students who get the definition of a word at the time that they need to know the meaning of that word are significantly more likely to retain the meaning of that word and, of course, then understand the story. Okay, so if that is a student you have, maybe you had a little face that came into your mind when I said that, a student who struggles with comprehension because of vocabulary, that's one way to kind of boost up that vocabulary lesson for the student. There's also a teacher's manual. In the teacher's manual, it gives you all kinds of tips and ideas. There's a lesson plan in there so that you can teach kids how to do the steps. So that lesson plan is written for you. You just have to follow along with it. Finally, it comes with a placement packet so that you can figure out which level is right for each kid. Okay, and I'll talk about that a little more in a moment. The other things that you need to purchase, though, are audio CD players and headphones. Each kid needs his own. You can't have 6 kids sharing one CD player and headphones. You're going to have human relations issues all over the place. And they're going to be waiting to use that CD player. And remember what I said about efficiency. You want to make every minute count, okay? So they also need a timer. And we have a few on our website if you're interested in looking at that. But the most important thing is that the timer is digital, so it's exact, and that it doesn't count down the seconds, because otherwise they'll spend half the minute looking at the timer. Right? So anytime you're doing fluency work, you want a digital timer that doesn't count down the seconds, so that each student can get an accurate number of words correct per minute. The different options for the series within Encore II, we have a sequence series that goes from 1st through 8th grade reading level. This program is widely used in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. We even have adult literacy programs using the program, because any student who reads at or below an 8th grade level can use it. So if you have a student who you think, is this going to be too babyish or too beneath them? We write our stories knowing that students who are older than that grade level are likely to be reading them. So the content isn't belittling or beneath them. All right, it's written with that fact in mind. As I mentioned earlier, we have this Phonics series where there's different vowels, short vowels, long vowels, blends, digraphs, and so forth. So if your students are reading at these early grade levels and have phonics needs, the Phonics series is a great way to address both fluency and comprehension as well as phonics. As I mentioned before, the sequence series has keywords with definitions. So there's a vocabulary lesson, and then there's that written retell at the end. Whereas the Phonics series, notice that these words don't have definitions, because the audio support doesn't provide the definition. It provides a lesson in that sound or pattern. Also at the end, you can see here's what the word list looks like. Students practice reading down these columns and across these rows until they've mastered it. And then they write words, they work on spelling words with that pattern. The idiom series, the keywords, of course, are phrases, right? They're idioms. And those levels are available in 3.0 to 4.5. There are teacher responsibilities that happen before students can begin, and those are the first 2 items on this list. Planning and setting up, making copies of the stories, putting the folders together, teaching the kids the step, placing the students, okay, placing the students so that you can get each kid in the exact right level. You can have every single kid in your group be in a different level and still work in this program. They'll all be on different steps at different times, and that will allow you to work with one-on-one with each student at specific points in their program, but they're working at their own level and their own pace. So after students are placed, you can begin implementing the steps of the program with the students. And then you're monitoring student performance. We have webinars on our website that address very detailed instructions on implementing the steps, as well as monitoring student performance. So if you want more detailed information, please look on our website for the recorded webinars on Encore. When you are determining placement, all you have to do is figure out which level is right for the student in this program. You're going to get a words correct per minute score, and you're going to provide a goal for the student during placement. So you're going to figure out which level is right for that student to work in Read Naturally Encore. You're going to figure out which series. So is the student going to use the sequence series, idiom series, or Phonics series? Which that decision might be made for you if you only have one of them at your site. And then you're going to figure out what the goal. And the goal is a words correct per minute score. So setting the goal, instructions are down here. It takes about 5 minutes per student to do placement, and it's essential. We place kids in a level that's a little higher than their instructional level, and it's really hard to figure out a goal if you haven't put them through placement. So I strongly encourage you taking students through the initial placement to get them in the exact right level for that student and with the right goal. Once students are placed, they can begin working through the story. These are the steps that students go through when working in Read Naturally Encore II. All right, so let's just walk through them now. Obviously, before they can begin working, you have to have created their folders, got their materials ready, placed them, and taught them how to do the steps. And once they've done that, they can go through these steps. I'm going to walk you through them with screenshots on my PowerPoint. On our website, we have a video called Working Through a Story in Read Naturally Encore. That video is an action video of it being used in a classroom. So if you're a visual person and you want to just stand in the corner of a classroom using the program, we have a video for that on our website. So feel free to take a look at that. So the very first thing the student does is select a story. Remember, I said they can pick any of the nonfiction stories. They're not ordered in any way. Go ahead and let them pick. The other thing is, there's nothing magical about 12 or 24 stories. Okay, so you can move students based on when you think they're ready. And again, we have webinars that can address that, but they do not have to finish every single one of those 24 stories before they can move on. All right, so after they pick which story they're going to work on, they can read the keywords and the definitions with the audio CD. Or if they're in the Phonics series, they can read the keywords and have the audio phonics lesson. After that, they write a prediction about what they think the story, excuse me, about what they think the story is going to be about. This should not be a big writing activity. It's just meant to take 1 or 2 minutes. So I like to have kids set their timer for 1 or 2 minutes so that I'm sure they don't waste too much time here. But we just want them to think about what it is they're about to read. So it's really about comprehending, because if we take a moment to predict, we are much more likely to understand what we read. After the prediction, they do a cold timing where they get a words correct per minute score. Ideally, you will be with the student for the cold timing. But I'm sure you've noticed, especially in the last couple of years, we are nowhere near an ideal situation. So if you have more kids than you can manage, allow them to do their own cold timing. That will allow you to get to more students and allow the students to not have to wait for you. Okay. While they wait for you, though, if you are having them wait for you here, they can do crossword puzzles with the glossary for this level. They can look up keywords and their definitions. Right? But ideally, you'll come to them very quickly, or you'll allow them to do it on their own. You don't want them waiting long. When they do the cold timing, they get a words correct per minute score. If you are with them, you know it's accurate. So mark the graph the times that you're with them, so you have an accurate curriculum-based measurement data point. If they're doing it on their own, the ones that you're not with them can't be considered totally accurate, right? So when you are able to do it, mark it so that you know which data point is the accurate one for progress monitoring using your curriculum-based measurement data. So after they do their cold timing, they get a words correct per minute score, which they graph in blue on the paper graph that they have in the back of their packet. And then they read along with the audio CD. Each time it gets a little bit faster. And they have to read along. That means they have to say the word, see the word, hear the word all at the same time, out loud. I say whisper reading. I don't want to hear you if I'm next door in the other teacher's class, because there's some kids that like to do that. So I call it whisper reading. If I'm standing next to the student, I want to hear them. If I see they're doing this right, maybe I can tell them they only have to do it twice. If I see that they're not doing it right, maybe I come by and I make them redo a read along. Okay, really that is essential that that read along, that teacher modeling portion is done properly. Next, they practice reading the same passage over and over again. And if you have them placed right, they will have to practice many times, somewhere between 3 and 10. I kind of think of the sweet spot as around 6, right? Each time they practice, they get better. And it's a little bit like a video game. And you'd be surprised at how much they like practicing when they see that each time their score goes up and they become more proficient with the story. After they practiced enough to reach their goal, they can answer their comprehension questions. And then the teacher can pass them. She's listening for 3 things. She's listening for the student reaching the goal of words correct per minute. So they have to read the certain number of words correct per minute based on their goal. they have to do it accurately. So the student can only have 3 or fewer errors in a minute timing. And finally, he has to have some expression. Okay, so we give a score of 1 to 4, and the scores of 2 and higher pass the student. So at that score gets graphed. You also check those comprehension questions. The results of the comprehension questions get graphed. I like to have students go back and fix anyone that they got wrong, right? They can write a retell or do their word list. Maybe you're skipping the retell because you had them do it orally, or you don't want to focus on that, or maybe you are, depending on the needs of the student. And then that word list is reading down columns and across rows. So using this data to monitor progress, we have, as I mentioned, we have multiple webinars on that topic alone. So feel free to look at our website. And if you are able to be with your students for every cold timing, these cold timing scores that will be listed here will be accurate. If you can't be there every cold timing, mark the ones that you are there for so that you can have some accurate curriculum-based measurement data to monitor progress. All right. So now that we've covered all the steps that students go through and the materials you have, I am going to offer up a little time for questions. Ben, I think we have a few moments to answer any questions that may have come through.
Yes, I have a few questions for you from our audience. Let's see here. The first one is, what are some strategies for collecting usable data?
Great question. So that is something that is automatically done by the student as they go through the program. So their cold timing score is graphed. The number of times they practice is recorded. I'm going to go back to that sheet. Their practices are recorded. Their number of errors on the cold timing are recorded. Errors on hot timing are recorded. It's recorded by a student, so it's not quite as pretty as our online version, Read Naturally Live. The computer collects that data and creates computer-generated reports, which look a little nicer. But the data is still there with Encore II. And so, as I mentioned just before, if you are not doing all the cold timings, making sure you indicate which ones you did will allow you to still have that measuring data. I like to take averages of how students did on the first 3 stories for cold timing, errors, hot timing, and comprehension percentages, for sure, those things. And then compare it to the most recent 3 stories. So I can see, is the student making progress on cold timings and comprehension? And it's very, very important to take averages because we all know struggling readers are nothing if they are not inconsistent. And so one data point sometimes can be somewhat misleading. Whereas if we have taken average of 3, first 3 compared to the most recent 3, that gives us a much stronger, more reliable number so that we can track progress a little more effectively. Great question.
Thanks, Claire. Another question, how do I work on vocabulary in addition to fluency and comprehension?
Yeah, great question. So there's a few steps in the program where students automatically work on vocabulary. We have the keyword step, which is a vocabulary step. And I like to, especially with students who I know struggle with vocabulary, I like to encourage students to include 1 or 2 of those vocabulary words in that prediction, that second step of predicting. Having students apply the knowledge of learning that word into writing a sentence that contains it is a very good way to kind of solidify that definition. I also like to have students look up keywords that are in their bolded in their story. I'm going to try to pop back here for a minute and see if I can see. Oh, I don't have a good example of it, but the passage has a number of words that are bolded, many more than just the 4 in the keywords. So all those words are in the glossary that comes with each level. So you can have them pick words to read their definitions. Maybe you have them do a quick little sketch of the words if vocabulary really is an issue. Then there's also crossword puzzles that go along with each level. And so working on those crossword puzzles as homework is another opportunity to hone in more on that vocabulary.
Okay, thanks, Claire. A question from some people that do not currently have the program. And actually, there's two questions here. What is the cost, and are there free trials available?
Oh yeah, great. Thank you for bringing that up. I should have mentioned it. Yes, Read Naturally always offers free trials of our programs. So with Read Naturally Encore, you can try a level of your choosing. You can just reach out to our customer service and they will send you whichever level you want to try. You can try it for 2 months, see if it is a good fit for you. If it's not, you can just ship it back to us. There's actually even a return label in the box. So very easy to ship it back, no cost to you. But it gives you an opportunity to try it with students. It is $135 per level per teacher. So depending on how many levels you need, will depend on the price. The levels, as I showed you, go up in half grade level increments. So you have 1.0 through 8.0 in the sequence series, then there's 6 levels in the Phonics series and 4 in idioms. You don't need all of them, you just need ones that would be in the range of your students. And please do contact us with for a trial. We also have trials of our online program, Read Live, again, 60 days for as many students as you want, and that would give you access to all the programs. So depending on which format you are interested in, there is a trial for you to give it a test run with your students.
Yep, and the pricing for Read Live is different than the pricing for Encore. With Read Live, you're paying for a per student license, and then that student has access to all the levels in Read Naturally Live, as well as the 3 other programs that come with Read Live.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. And the other, since we did mention a little bit about Read Live, I do want to mention within Read Live, there is an independent reading program called 1 Minute Reader Live. And I have been talking with a lot of teachers who have found that to be so helpful right now when we have such a huge increase in the number of students with reading issues, but we don't have a huge increase in our teaching staffs. So 1 Minute Reader Live, if you wanted to have a trial of Read Live, you could try that independent reading program so that you can have students having structured guided reading during independent reading time. And that does not require the direct attention of the teacher. So that is one way to get some of our struggling students a little bit more support in order to catch up to their peers.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Claire. Now, there are a number of other questions. We are pretty much out of time, and Claire or myself will be responding to those unanswered questions in our questions panel that you've put forth after our session today. I want to thank you, Claire, and thanks to everyone for attending our webinar today. Another reminder that we'll be sending up follow-up emails with links to the recording in about 24 hours. So please look for that in your inbox. Feel free to share the recording with anyone at your school or district. Also, if you could, please respond to the survey that will appear on your screen as you exit the webinar so we can continue to improve this educational experience for all of you in the future. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Take care.